an Israeli bombing raid on Syria. This has now just started to become uncovered by publications like Axios, but it happened actually Monday. I believe that was the September 9th. And Syria is saying over 15 people were killed. And the stated purpose of this raid, Professor Marandi, was to destroy a missile production factory that was organized and institutionalized by Hezbollah in Iran. So I wanted to ask you, Professor Marandi, given all that has happened since the last time you were on the show, could you assess where this action fits within the broader response that Iran and Hezbollah and the Axis of Resistance have taken to Israel following its incredibly aggressive incursions into Iran and Lebanon, murdering major leaders of the Palestinian resistance and the resistance as a whole?
I think there are a couple of things that we have to first remind ourselves about. One is that the Israeli regime constantly bombs Syria. It constantly kills Syrian citizens and Syrian soldiers, which is a violation of international law. And of course, the United States and Turkey, they're all alongside the Israelis violating international law by occupying the country. The second is that I think we now are understanding exactly why the dirty war on Syria began in the first place in 2011 and 12. Back then, when, as you know, when Jake Sullivan, who is the current U.S. National Security Advisor, on February the 12th, 2012, wrote in an email to Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, we know why they were carrying out the dirty war, because Syria is very important to the resistance. It is very important to the Palestinian resistance. It's important to Hezbollah and the resistance in Lebanon, which is assisting the people of Gaza by drawing away half of the armed forces drawing them away from Gaza. And of course, we know about the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012, where it was stated that U.S. allies in the region were intending to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq. And of course, that was ISIS. And we have to remember that ISIS was Al-Qaeda. There was a split in Al-Qaeda, and one part of it became ISIS. The other remained Al-Qaeda, and then changed its name on a number of occasions, which I won't go into. And then, of course, General Michael Flynn, in an interview on Al Jazeera, of all places, admitted that the Obama regime supported this policy of creating the Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq. So at the time when Western media was screaming and yelling about human rights and about how President Assad was killing his own people, the reality was that the people behind the Western media, they were the ones who were destroying Syria, because Syria is key to the resistance. Syria today is playing a key role in the resistance. So if the Israeli regime actually attacked a factory that's making munitions or missiles, it's doing it for the resistance. And therefore, Syria, unlike Turkey, is actively supporting the resistance. Syria, unlike any other Arab country in the region, is actively supporting the resistance. And that is, again, why they've been punished for so long. That's why they're sanctioned. That's why their country is occupied. Turkey, the people of Turkey, of course, show great sympathy towards the Palestinian people, but the Turkish intelligence, Turkish military, the Turkish government, they've destroyed so much of Syria. They've sent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of extremists and terrorists into Syria, or armed them inside Syria, but they won't send a single bullet to the West Bank or Gaza. They won't send any of those extremists or those Wahhabis or those Salaf to Palestine to defend the Palestinian people. So I think we have to rethink everything. We have to go back to the past and better understand what happened. So the Syrians are obviously, according to what the Israelis are claiming, they were attacking a factory that was supporting the resistance. Now, in reality, the Israelis are lying. They changed the story. First, they were saying that they captured Iranians or people affiliated to Iran. They showed no evidence of that because they didn't capture anyone. Second of all, the factories that exist in Syria are spread out across the country. Small factories here and there. There's nothing big for the Israelis to go and destroy. And also we saw that the Israelis killed a lot of innocent civilians, which of course that is their major success. What happened in this attack was basically the massacre of ordinary Syrians. So there was no major target. There was no achievement. There was a massacre of ordinary people who went to help the injured, and then they attacked those people. That's basically what happened. Just like everything else that the Israeli regime does. When they bomb Gaza and slaughter people, they say that there were Hamas commanders among the civilians. They always have some sort of excuse for their outrageous acts. But we have to, we have to conclude here that A, Syria is actively supporting the resistance by the admission of the Israeli regime. B, no one else is doing it. No other country except for, of course, Iran, Yemen, and parts of the Lebanese state and the Iraqi state to a degree. No one is supporting the resistance except for these entities. And we have to also take anything that the Israeli regime says. We have to look at it carefully. We shouldn't really believe anything that they say. So no, it wasn't a major operation. It wasn't a successful operation. The Syrians are not foolish. They don't make big factories they don't have big factories so that the Israeli regime can bomb them or attack them. They're spread out. Many are underground, well protected. They're small factories or buildings or houses or places where they make bits and they make parts and that are spread out across the country. So it wasn't an achievement. The Israelis have failed across the board. They failed in Lebanon. They failed in stopping Syria and others and Iran from supplying and supporting the resistance, whether in Lebanon or in Gaza. They failed in the Red Sea. They failed in the West Bank, which of course people should also ask themselves, where did the weapons in the West Bank come from? Where did the defense capabilities of the Palestinian people in the West Bank come from? Despite the fact that the Jordanian government is supporting the Israeli regime and they're trying to protect the Israeli regime on its eastern borders, but these weapons are getting through. I think you'd have to look at Syria and recognize that it is Syria that is making these, or at least it is one of the entities that's making sacrifices for the people of Palestine. And even now, as Syria is under pressure from the Israeli regime, the Turkish government won't withdraw from Syria. They continue to draw huge resources away, Syrian resources, away from their border with northern Palestine and the Syrian Golan. They draw Syrian resources and equipment away and prevent the Syrians from focusing on the Israeli regime. So the role of Mr. Erdogan, despite all the rhetoric, is only destructive. He's not just not helping. He's assisting the Israelis. And of course, we know that oil goes through Turkey to Israel from Baku, and that trade continues. And of course there are political relations. Some sometimes ask, why do you insist on making these issues? We have to put pressure on all of these regimes in the region to cut off ties with the Israeli regime, to end their support for the Israeli regime, to end the hypocrisy, to end this ugly hypocrisy so that the people in Gaza can achieve victory. so that the resistance can achieve victory. And none of these governments are playing a positive role whatsoever. Jordan, very negative. Turkey, very negative. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates in particular, very negative. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And we have to continue to support all of those entities that are supporting the resistance, and to put pressure on those entities who are impeding the work of the resistance.
The last time there was a strikes into Syria where it made major media reports, because oftentimes these strikes do not make major news. It was Israel trying to uh, pin onto Hezbollah the strike on the Golan Heights and Majd al-Shams. And what's so interesting about this, I think, Professor Marandi, all those points you made, I think, are incredibly important. The ways in which the region has taken shape, and the divisions in the region from those who talk a lot, like Turkey, and those who actually support Palestine, like Syria, like Hezbollah, like Iran. And, I'm wondering if you could comment on this, what seems to be an attempt by Israel to deflect from these failures that you talk about, because this strike, even the Western media is saying it's impossible right now to verify. So why is it then that Israel is so hell bent on almost highlighting Hezbollah and Iran's role here? It seems almost counterproductive.
I think it's quite obvious to everyone that the Israeli regime has lost, as I said earlier. So they've lost in Gaza, they've lost in the West Bank, they've lost in the Red Sea. The Americans and the British, mainly the Americans, doing the fighting on their behalf, but the Americans have lost, or the Israelis have lost in the Red Sea. They've lost on all the fronts, in Lebanon, with Syria. They've lost world public opinion, which is the most important thing of all. They've delegitimized themselves in the eyes of public opinion. Those of us who always saw it as an illegitimate regime, we continue to see it that way. But others who were less informed, who were influenced by Western narratives and Western media, saw the Israeli regime as a legitimate entity. Now people don't see it that way. We see how even in the United States, the left and the right, how ordinary people, how influential people are turning against the regime, despite the powerful Zionist lobby that exists in the United States and, of course, in Europe. But the Israeli regime needs an excuse. They need an excuse to explain away why they failed in Gaza. Remember, Gaza is just a dot on the map. It's a very small piece of land. And the Israeli regime was supposedly the superpower of the region. It was supposedly the regime that had enormous intelligence gathering capabilities, an enormously powerful military, a very powerful economy, but it has been exposed as completely dependent on the United States and the West. It's shown itself to be incapable in the face of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And the same is true, of course, in the north with Hezbollah, which, of course, is a much more powerful force with major capabilities that do not exist in Gaza or the West Bank. And the same is true with Yemen and elsewhere. So the regime has to have an excuse, but also the regime is attempting to expand the war. It wants to draw in the Americans, just like Zelensky, who is constantly trying to provoke Russia and to get NATO involved. Zelensky wants the people of the United States and Europe to sacrifice themselves for his regime. The same is true in Israel. The Israeli regime wants to sacrifice the West. They're willing to wreck Western economies and wreck their status across the world for their own self-preservation. And so they have to speak about the role of Iran and Hezbollah. But of course, it's not false. It is true. Hezbollah has force the regime to end the occupation of northern parts of northern Palestine. People have been forced to leave the border, well over 100,000 people. Some estimates are even greater than that. And Iran will continue to support the resistance. Recently, I was interviewed. I think I did an interview, and someone said I admitted that Iran was supporting the resistance. I found that very strange. Iran has always been supporting the resistance. Iran has openly been supporting the resistance in every way possible for decades. That's why Iran is so sanctioned. Those who say, why isn't Iran doing anything? I think they've been asleep for the last few decades. Iran is the country under maximum pressure sanctions. None of the countries in the region or beyond are under any sanctions whatsoever. The maximum pressure sanctions on Iran are because of Iran's position on Palestine, because of Iran's support for Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and of course, the other members of the axis of resistance. So Iran is supporting the resistance. Hezbollah is making major sacrifices. And this is a very important point to note. Hezbollah is voluntarily making sacrifices. They could have cut a deal with the Israeli regime, or they could have carried out token strikes on Israel and kept the border quiet, and they could have gotten huge concessions from the West. The West and Israel would do literally anything so that Hezbollah would be quiet and refrain from fighting. They would give Yemen the world so that it would stop blocking trade that's linked to the genocidal Israeli regime. But none of them will accept concessions from the West. Hezbollah won't. They're voluntarily making sacrifices, even though they have enemies within their own country that are trying to undermine them as a resistance. It's not as if the whole of Lebanon are behind them. They're the fascists who were with the Israelis during the civil war, who are plotting against Hezbollah as we speak. And of course, you have Syria, which has so many difficulties in the north with Al-Qaeda, with the foreign-backed Al-Qaeda forces. So Hezbollah is fighting against Israel, giving martyrs, civilians being martyred in order to help Palestine. And no matter what the West says, they will continue to make those sacrifices. And as I said, in Yemen, just a couple of days ago, the Americans murdered a bunch of school children, a bunch of girls who they were innocent. But Yemen continues to make these sacrifices despite the criminal actions of the United States and the British and the Israeli regime when they carried out an attack on the port of Al Hodeidah, striking civilian infrastructure, which had nothing to do with Ansarullah or the Yemeni armed forces. So everyone is making sacrifices, and the Israeli regime, of course, is not is saying it as it is. It is Iran, it is Hezbollah, but they are also trying to seek ways to persuade their public that they are winning. So they pretend that they carried out a successful operation in Syria. They pretend that they were successful in Yemen. They pretend that they're successful in Lebanon, the West Bank, and Gaza. But after 11 months, we see that they failed on all accounts. Their economy is in tatters. Their reputation has been completely destroyed. And the longer the war lasts, the worse it is going to be for the Israeli regime.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.